The alarm shattered the silence of the apartment at 8:30 in the evening. George Sullivan reached for the phone on his worn bedside table and pressed the button to turn it off. Time to get ready for work. He splashed cold water on his face, staring at the familiar features in the mirror. 42 years old. Thinning dark hair. Deep wrinkles around the eyes. The traces of sleepless nights and long, heavy naps. His job as a security guard at Premium Auto Parking didn't pay much, but it covered the bills and groceries. Pulling on his blue uniform jacket with the company patch, George checked his pockets, a small flashlight, a set of keys, a pack of cigarettes, a lighter, and an old folding knife, a gift from his grandfather that he carried more out of habit than for protection. In the breast pocket rested his radio, an outdated model that barely worked near the local transmitter. The bus ride to the lot took 20 minutes. George sat by the window, watching the familiar streets of the North District flash by. The October evening was surprisingly warm, a last gift from the fading Indian summer. At the industrial zone stop, he got off and walked the remaining 300 meters to the parking lot. Premium Auto Parking was on the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by abandoned factory buildings and warehouses. A tall metal fence enclosed the lot, which was the size of a football field. Inside, cars were lined up in neat rows from budget domestic sedans to high-end imports, a BMW WX5, a Mercedes class, several Lexuses, valuable toys that owners preferred to keep under watch rather than in suburban yards. At the gate waited Mike, the daytime guard, with a scar running across his left cheek. Finally, Sullivan, he grunted, pulling a thermos of tea from the booth. Thought you'd be late again? Everything's fine, Mike. How's it look out here? Quiet. That black BMW owner picked up his car for the weekend. The rest is the usual. Just some drunks loitering. He nodded toward the abandoned factory. Spotted 3 of them. Be careful. Troublemakers were a constant problem in the area, looking for scrap metal, smashing windows, stealing stereos. They rarely tried the guarded lot, but anything could happen. Mike handed George the patrol sheet and keys to the booth. Something's wrong with the wiring in the corner. Lights flicker. The electrician said he'll come tomorrow. Otherwise, all's quiet. See you. He left, leaving George alone with hundreds of cars and an 8-hour night shift ahead. The booth smelled of cheap cigarettes and cheaper tea. A small TV in the corner showed evening news. George turned off the sound and switched on the radio, letting the calm instrumental music fill the night. Perfect for a long night. His first patrol started at 10:30. The flashlight cut through the darkness, glinting off hoods and bumpers, illuminating the empty spaces between rows. All was quiet. Near the far fence lay a pile of construction, debris remnants from a nearby warehouse renovation. After checking the locks and fence integrity, he returned to the booth. At 11, he recorded in the log, 10:50 p.m., patrol complete. No violations observed. He pulled a sandwich from his bag, poured himself some tea, and turned down the TV. On NTV, a segment recalled events from 7 years ago. It was strange to see footage from the late 90s, seemingly distant, though not that long ago. By midnight it began to drizzle. The drops drummed on the roof, creating a monotonous rhythm. George poured more tea and lit a cigarette. The night promised to be long and uneventful. Most nights were. Sometimes he wondered why the lot even needed a guard. In 2 years, nothing serious had ever happened. A few times, teenagers climbed over the fence to sit in someone else's car and listen to music, but it was more for fun than theft. At 1 a.m., he started the second patrol. The rain picked up, soaking his jacket. Water ran along the asphalt, forming puddles between the cars. His flashlight reflected off the wet surfaces, casting eerie glimmers. At a white Mercedes in the third row, he stopped. The driver's door seemed ajar. He stepped closer, shining the light inside. It was closed. Returning to the booth, he heard a sound beyond the fence, someone stepping on a tin can. He froze, straining to listen. Silence, only the rain. Probably a stray cat or dog. By 2:30 a.m., George dozed off, slumped in his chair. His head nodded forward, the quiet broken only by the steady rain. A sudden metallic crash jolted him awake. Something heavy had been thrown near the main gates. He peeked from the booth. In the street light, 3 figures appeared. One fiddled with the lock, 2 others stood watch. Young, athletic men, dark clothes, and knit caps. George's heart raced. Protocol demanded calling the dispatch and police. Immediately, but the radio was unreliable, and his cell phone only worked in the open. He slipped outside, crouching between rows toward the gate. Rain masked his footsteps. 30 meters from the entrance, he hid behind a blue Ford. The scene became clearer. One of the intruders faced the street, watching for traffic. Another used a tool, likely bolt cutters, on the lock. The third urged him on. The chain gave way. The gates creaked open. George dialed the dispatch. "Hello? This is Sullivan from Premium Auto 3 Unknowns. Just broke in." The connection failed. No signal. The intruders moved between the cars, searching for something. George knew he had to act. If they drove off, he'd be fired. But 3 young men versus one 40-year-old guard? Not good odds. One had a bolt cutter heavy enough to use as a weapon. They stopped at a black BMW X5. One tried the door, failed. The largest said something. The smallest ran toward the tools. George decided he couldn't just hide. He headed to the booth, hoping to grab the megaphone. Halfway there, he heard glass shattering. They had started on the BMW. No time for the megaphone. He stopped by a red van, blew his whistle with all his might. The sound pierced the night. The reaction was immediate. They turned. One ran toward him, knife flashing. "Private property," George shouted, pointing his flashlight. The intruder didn't stop. George turned and ran toward the booth, footsteps pounding behind him. Suddenly, the pursuing steps halted. He looked back. The young man froze, staring at something else, something impossible. A low, aggressive growl reverberated across the lot. The intruder inched backward, knife trembling. George followed his gaze. Between the rows of cars stood something unimaginable. Human-like in form, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but all wrong. Arms too long, nearly reaching the knees. Legs short and thin. Tiny head jutting forward. Skin gray, faintly glowing. Energy radiated from it like a compressed spring. The eyes, enormous, completely black. The intruder who had been chasing George stumbled backward, and then the creature lunged. In seconds, its long arms clamped around the intruder. A sickening crunch. The body went limp. The creature opened its wide, unnatural mouth and swallowed him whole. Seconds later, only the knife lay on the asphalt. George stood paralyzed. The creature turned toward him. The black eyes met his, but instead of attacking, it simply walked away toward the other two intruders at the BMW. The smaller one urged the larger. The car roared to life, speeding toward the exit, but the creature stood still. At the last moment, the BMW swerved left and smashed into a truck at the gate. George ran to the wreck. The larger intruder was alive, unconscious, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. It was in the car, he whispered. The creature stood a few meters away, observing. Its gray skin was marred with dark stains, fingers tipped with black claws. No face, just a smooth surface with eye sockets and a slit for a mouth. It reached through the broken glass again, crunching, smacking, then silence. It straightened, stared at George. The knife in his hand felt useless. Its black eyes bore no malice, no hunger, just detached attention. After a few moments, it turned and walked into the shadows of the lot, disappearing completely. George Sullivan was left alone, in a parking lot full of wrecked cars and memories of something impossible.